So where are we right now? Well, today the internet benefits for people with disabilities and the mainstream have converged to a certain degree. There are now 4 major benefits that I see as being what's really helpful, not just to the mainstream, but also to people with disabilities. First up is the choice of media types. As a person with a disability, I have so much choice in how I find my information. Being vision impaired, I might find a podcast, given that it's all audio, that could be a really beneficial thing to use. If I'm hearing impaired, I might go for a captioned video. And to be able to have that choice as to how I receive information really does make a difference. There's also real-time communication, software like LiveStation and other live internet streaming video. If that has accessibility features on it, then not only am I looking at local media, but I have international. I can choose from a wealth of information resources and live, which is wonderful. Also, there's communication. And for people who are hearing impaired, to be able to sign to each other through Skype. If you have a mobility issue, to be able to connect with family and friends around the world without physically having to go there is fantastic. To digress slightly and to share a little story with you. Last year, it was my son's first birthday. And originally from Perth, now living in Sydney, I really wanted to make sure that my parents, the grandparents of my son, can join in that experience. So we set up the little netbook laptop at the end of the table, and we had the camera pointing in so that you could see the cake and my son and my daughter and the family. And it was great. We could all sing happy birthday to each other. And it was just a really wonderful experience. But what was interesting was that my daughter, who turns 4 in January, she was eyeing off a cherry on top of the birthday cake. And she thought it'd be really good to try and swipe it. So when I wasn't looking and when my wife wasn't looking, she quietly sort of snuck in and tried to grab that cherry. You can imagine her surprise when 6 people from the computer screen went, "Stop!" I think it's great you can be sprung by Skype. And I think it's a good example of how technology now can really bring us together. And as a person with a disability, it really does add that extra dimension. Also, there's collaboration. And cloud computing, for those who aren't familiar, is when applications which would normally sit on your computer, like a Word document, can now be put online through something like Google Docs, and everyone can interact with that document. And again, as a person with a disability, particularly if you have a mobility impairment, to be able to work on documents and pictures and collaborate around the world, no matter where you are, this is a fantastic opportunity, and the technology really helps support that well for people with disabilities. However, unfortunately, although the technology is great in terms of its potential, there are still some significant access issues that need to be addressed. Currently, there's about 18% less people with a disability using the internet compared to the able-bodied population. So this is a great cause for concern. You'd think with all these benefits that more people with disabilities would be using the internet rather than less. So what are the reasons that are holding people back? I've got a few here. Firstly, broadband access in this country still has significant issues, and we're hopeful that the National Broadband Network Initiative may make a difference here. Currently, about 70% of Australians have access to broadband, but that's only 30% amongst people with core disabilities. So this is a significant issue. I mean, all those benefits that I mentioned before, most of them you can't enjoy without high-speed internet, and you certainly can't enjoy them if you have no internet at all. Website accessibility still remains another key issue. If websites aren't designed in a particular way, a lot of the assistive technology that people use to access them just simply won't work. To give you a real-life example, yesterday I tried to buy some tickets to the Cockatoo Island New Year's Eve gathering. We thought it'd be really nice for my family and I. I'm fairly new to Sydney, to enjoy New Year's Eve on Cockatoo Island in the tent. So at 9 a.m. yesterday morning, I was eagerly poised, ready to buy my tickets. And by the time I had selected the tickets and worked my way to the checkout part, because there were some accessibility issues on the site, by the time I put in my details, the tickets had all sold out. Now, I contacted the management and they pointed out that the tickets had sold out by 9:04 a.m. So it was certainly a very, very popular event. But from my humble opinion, if I had tried to buy those tickets at 9:05, then I would say fair enough that I'd missed out. But the fact that as a person with a disability, I was there on time but still missed out because of that, that's disappointing. And it's a reflection of the sort of day-to-day struggles that people often have with website accessibility. In terms of other issues, I was saying about video and how what a wonderful option there is with the choice of media. However, there isn't a lot of captioning or audio description available on the internet. For those who aren't aware, audio description is when it's made specifically for people who are blind or vision impaired, and it's a little bit of extra narration that goes in the audio track to describe something really visual that's happening in a movie or on TV. And although those things are quite prominent now in DVD releases and cinema, unfortunately it's still very limited on the net. And then there's cloud computing. Well, as I was saying, there's huge collaborative potential with cloud computing, which is really exciting. But how accessible is the cloud? Well, Google Docs isn't too bad. What about other things? Well, it's so new, we don't really know. So we need to look at more at cloud computing, what its potential is, and if there are accessibility issues popping up, we need to address them. The other big thing which is different in Australia to other countries is the policy and legislative support for accessibility online. Internationally, there's quite a lot of work being done in the access area. The United States, the EU, Canada and New Zealand have a lot of policy and legislative support to ensure that access happens. The United States in particular, they have the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and within that they have Section 508. And Section 508 basically states that if you're selling a product to the US federal government, it must adhere to certain accessibility criteria. Likewise, if the US government makes information online, it must also make sure that things are accessible. A good example of that is Hewlett-Packard. They made laptops so that you can open them with one hand without the base flicking up for people with mobility issues. And ultimately, Hewlett-Packard decided, well, if we're going to be making that to sell them to the US federal government, why not make them for everyone else? And that then filtered into the mainstream. So legislation does have a big impact. And I was reminded recently that I did some interviews for my PhD, and when I interviewed one person at IBM, he came up with the saying, people generally do what you inspect rather than what you expect. And I think he has a point when it comes to legislation. In Australia, we have no IT-based legislation to support the needs of people with disabilities. So the closest we have is Disability Discrimination Act, but there is nothing actually in that act specifically IT related. So one of the things that would be nice to see is some improvements in that area. Most of the state governments have some good policy on it, but a policy is not enforceable, or, so even today government websites are going online that don't meet basic accessibility criteria. So that's a little bit of an overview as to why accessibility is important. Now I just want to mention why the work that you do here at the ABC is so important. When I started my PhD, I had this initial assumption as to why that 18% statistical gap was there. And my initial assumption was that people with disabilities, they would try to access the internet, they'd run into barriers, and they'd ultimately give up. But I was wrong. Actually, what happens is that people with disabilities, they do try to access the internet, and they do run into barriers. But where I was wrong is that they don't give up. People with disabilities are as knowledgeable, if not more knowledgeable, the findings of my thesis would suggest, than the mainstream population, because they see that there is this independent access to information that they can obtain if they persevere and can get through these barriers. So rather than give up, they keep trying and they keep trying and they keep trying. The really exciting thing from our point of view is what this means is that when we get access right, when we do address these access issues, we know that the floodgates are going to open in a sense, and people with disabilities will be able to leap on the technologies that are so beneficial to them. And you are at the coalface of this and have a great opportunity to try and address these issues. My presentation today is not about a big stick approach, although I do have one. My aim today is to start a dialogue and look at collaboration between the organisations such as the very important ABC and organisations like ourselves and the end user, an opportunity for us to work together to try and address these access issues and really make a difference. And as I'm saying, I'd also like to try and see some legislative change down the track too.